Thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here. I started my career as a preschool and kindergarten teacher many years ago, and most of my job required writing stories, taking down the dictated stories of what the children would tell me or what they were playing in the classroom. Those stories were the crux of our curriculum. That's what we learned about each other and what I learned about their development through those stories. So I'd like to start with one of those stories today, a story about Seth. Seth, I met when he was 2 years old. He entered my classroom with great exuberance, and the one defining moment of the whole school year was when I was comforting a little girl who was crying, and Seth ran across the room and jumped on top of my back and tried to wrestle me to the ground. Seth thought that I was the cause of the little girl crying, and he was taking action. I then had the great fortune of being Seth's teachers for the next 3 years beyond that. We followed each other into kindergarten. So I had many, many years of these stories. And as you can imagine, I noticed a pattern. There was great explosions. There was always high drama. Someone was getting killed. And someone was always crying. And so finally, at about kindergarten year, I decided to ask him a question. Seth, why is it that you're always fighting in your stories? Being the conscientious teacher, I was worried of violent tendencies and what he might be learning in the world. And when I asked that question, Seth looked at me as if I could possibly be the most dense person on the face of the earth. Like, haven't you been paying attention? And he said to me, Miss Debora, we're not fighting, we're saving. Oh, that lesson that Seth taught me has stayed with me for a long time. That aha moment was, I should not assume that just because I've had a shared experience with someone that we would have the same perspective, that we would have the same understanding about what was happening there. And I've taken that with me throughout my career. So now I am not always collecting children's stories, but I am collecting stories about research, stories from classrooms, from school districts, from nonprofits, from administrators, all people very interested in the early childhood education and well-being of young children. So what I'd like to share with you today are a few of those stories, a few of those perspectives that I'm getting as I'm researching what is best for our children. So just recently, a book has come out by Paul Tough called How Children Succeed. And he collected stories and research from biologists who were studying how rats take care of their babies, mother rats, how they nurture their babies when they're under stress. And he researched schools. And he collected that information, and he came down from one great finding. Children need loving relationships, first and foremost, particularly from infancy and toddlerhood. He said in that first year, he said, children, you just can't love them enough. And whether it's the first touch from your mother or your brother, or whether it's your father holding your hand for that first step, or whether it's your teacher who's intently devoted to you in the moment of teaching you something new, at the base of that is a loving relationship. The other thing that is very important is that children have health and well-being. What makes them healthy and well? Besides the loving relationships, we realize, of course, it's good food, nutrition, sleep, fresh water, clean air, and as the American Academy of Pediatrics, who just put out a report last year, they said children, in order to thrive, need just as much as they need good food and sleep, they also need play. Lots of kinds of play. The play that Seth was doing, the imagination, the discovery play. And so that becomes then a part of our early childhood institutions. I want to also share with you a perspective that isn't always thought about or maybe even known about, a historical perspective of early childhood education in this country. And that is that many of the great philosophers, theorists who created some of our first early childhood programs had big dreams. Frederick Froebel, who was known as the father of kindergarten, realized or believed that when a child is playing or singing songs or playing with other children, they are not only learning skills, but they're learning the interconnectedness that we all have to one another and to the universe. Maria Montessori said that the main role of education is world peace, and politics just keeps us out of war. Jane Addams, who instituted the Hull House in Chicago, was there to create a space for immigrant women and their children. She was an advocate for workers' rights, for immigrant rights, for children's rights, and she was a peace activist. She had some really big dreams. She, in fact, won the Nobel Peace Prize. So when we're thinking about test scores or policies today, I think it's important to remember one perspective of early childhood, and that's our historical perspective. Which brings me back to a child again who provided me with an aha moment. This is a picture that my son, who's 4, just drew a few weeks ago. And as I was gazing at it, I had to ask him some questions. Well, William, that's not your whole family. Where's everyone else? Well, they're visiting so-and-so. And my teacher, Miss Carolyn, she's at school and she's waiting for me. In his discussion, in that moment of him explaining his picture, I realized most young children, when you ask them to draw a picture of themselves, they rarely draw that picture of them alone. They draw it with everyone around them. They realize we're all connected in some way, and we're there for them, even when we're not even on the page. So that lesson brings me to some hope, actually. Why is this important? To consider these different perspectives and to think about the connectedness between them. Because when we are creating early childhood environments that provide health and well-being and an education, we're not creating just one system, an education system. We're not just creating a health system. We're not just creating an economic system. All of those systems, all of these efforts that we put into early childhood are cross-disciplinary. They're cross-sectors. And they need each other. We're connected to one another. So I've been noticing something recently in focusing on early childhood education, and that is people are coming together. People who normally wouldn't be talking and sitting down with one another. One example is actually the Association for Childhood Education International and the Alliance for Childhood have teamed up and just kicked off this year a decade for childhood. They're not coming out and saying this is exactly what every community needs to do. Actually, they're coming out and imploring to communities, local, state, national, the global community, to ask questions about childhood, to reflect on what we're doing to help one another, to help children. In fact, I love this phrase that they use. One of the questions is, what supports children and ultimately all of us in creating loving relationships, developing a healthy environment, and creating opportunities for lifelong learning? Another group that I've become involved with is the U.S. Play Coalition. As I mentioned earlier of those perspectives, many early childhood teachers will recognize the importance of play. What's exciting about play, though, is, yes, we know it's good for children, but how is it good for children, and in what ways? And a group has come together called the U.S. Play Coalition, which is interdisciplinary, and it's brought in pediatricians, parks and rec people, gerontologists. It's across the whole age span. And they've brought people together to focus on and research and advocate for play. What we're learning about play is much deeper than what we had known before. And then recently, I've just joined the University of Nebraska system, and doing so for the reason of collaborating with the Buffett Early Childhood Institute. What's unique about this, there's lots of institutes out there, but what's unique about this one, I think, is that it's not one individual private nonprofit foundation going out on their own. It's actually collaborating with a public institution that has promised to use all of their resources, not just the teacher educators, not just the pediatrics, but everyone, all of their resources to work on the issues of developing a better world for children so that they may thrive. So, which brings me back to Seth again. I didn't even tell you the best part of the story. It wasn't that aha moment, although that really did shock me. What's important to know about that story about Seth is that what came later, after we realized that we had different perspectives, he was able to explain more, and we developed a deeper understanding of one another. In fact, I found out why he was always saving. It seems to me he thought that when he got older and went to college, that he would live in a dorm. One floor would be for boys, and one floor would be for girls. And when the robbers came to get them, he would have to save the girls. As you might imagine, that provided the opportunity for a very challenging discussion with Seth and his teacher, but also the little girls in his classroom. They had a different perspective. But in doing so, we had better understanding. We needed Seth's perspective, the girls' perspective, my perspective, to have a better understanding and to learn better things, to do better things. We needed each other. So I'm just asking everyone in the room here today, and anyone who's considering thinking about supporting young children, to realize that we have to work together. We have to cross our lines. We have to get out of our comfort zones. We have to talk to people we never thought would be interested in early childhood education and care. We have to learn to talk across disciplines too, and listen. We have to use our best diplomatic skills to make this work. But I think we can, because like Seth said, we're not fighting, we're saving. Thank you.